morning. My name is Valerie Hughes, and I actually am the treasurer for NCGS. A little bit out of my element with all you educators, but certainly enjoy it. I'm obviously on the board of NCGS. I also serve as the associate head for finance and administration at Hathaway Brown School in Cleveland, Ohio. So I will, it is my pleasure to introduce you, and just to make sure you are in the session called The State of and Key Challenges Facing Girls' Education in a Transforming Society. And I would like to present to you Libogang Montjanes, who is the Executive Director of the Independent Schools Association of Southern Africa, and he will introduce our keynote speaker.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for that introduction. I met Professor Wilmot on my holiday, and I broke it, and I was hoping that it would be worth it. Well, it was more than worth it, and here we are today. Professor Wilmot has been involved in education for more than 35 years. As a secondary school, initially as a teacher at an all-girls school, and later as a teacher-educator at one of the top South African universities. For many years, she was the driving force behind initial teacher education at Rhodes University before being elected the first woman dean of the Faculty of Education in 2010. Under her strategic leadership, the Rhodes Education Faculty has set its agenda for the future to provide quality education and increase access to quality education for all. It resulted in a faculty strategic plan that included taking a bold step of going against the university's strategy to become more postgraduate and expanding initial teacher education in response to the national need for producing more teachers. To support the extension of teacher education, the National Department of Higher Education provided funding of $1 million, or 16,800 million rands, for a new teacher education building at Rhodes University. And one of the reasons why my trip went so well, I have never seen such an inspired space. It is both visionary and a wonderful space for teacher education at Rhodes University, and certainly the best looking faculty of education in the country. Di led a team that conceptualized and designed an innovative teacher education facility that reflects contemporary pedagogical principles. And her leadership, a new four-year undergraduate Bachelor of Education degree for foundation phase teachers, and for us it's grade 1 through 3, which has a bilingual curriculum, was started in 2015. The program addresses a national transformational imperative of producing more African language mother tongue language teachers in the foundation phase. It targets academically talented mother tongue Xhosa speakers and students from rural working class backgrounds. Recognizing that access to higher education for economically disadvantaged students is not enough, Di went on to great lengths to secure ring-fenced, state-funded merit bursaries to the value of $1.5 million for deserving students. Di's passion and commitment to education extends beyond teacher education to schooling in both the public and independent sector. She has also been actively involved in school governance for many years at a prestigious all-girls independent school. During her tenure as the first woman chairman of the Council of the Diocesan School for Girls, which is more than a century old, she led a process of strategic planning that set the agenda for the school's future and sustainability. The first phase of which involved the design and building of a new primary school informed by contemporary thinking in education. She's a builder. Di is a member of the governing body, which consists of a small group of experts at Rhodes University that have conceptualized and began implementing an insightful, innovative, and pragmatic model to revitalize and transform public schooling in Grahamstown, the town in which Rhodes University is located. 4 flagship projects are being implemented at present. The long-term goal is to ensure that every child in the town receives an education that equips him or her for a life of significance. Alongside her primary responsibility of leadership and management, Dia continues to be an active and engaged researcher, teacher with a special interest in curriculum and pedagogical transformation and school geography. She has published many journal articles, chapters in books and research reports. A recurring theme in her work is how developing countries in Southern Africa are grappling with educational change and transformation. Her presentation today focuses on how all girls independent schools are grappling with the complexities and messiness of change. And also what I haven't mentioned in my introduction, Dia is a product of an all-girls school and also sent her daughter to an all-girls school. Professor Wilmot.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. I'm honoured to have been invited to address you on the state of girls' education in a developing country like South Africa at this particular point in our history. And on behalf of the Independent Schools Association South Africa, whom I represent, I should like to thank the National Coalition of Girls' Schools for the opportunity it affords South African all-girls schools to strengthen existing and build new networks, to share best practices and learn from the experiences and innovations and achievements of all-girls schools in different national contexts. I should like to reaffirm the National Coalition of Girls' Schools' commitment to the transformative power of all-girls schools and its important role that it plays in collaborating and connecting globally with individuals, schools, and organizations dedicated to empowering girls to be influential contributors to the world. From my own experiences as a pupil, a mother, a teacher educator, and a researcher, and also a school governor of an all-girls school, I'm acutely aware of the transformative power of girls' schools and the role that they play in empowering girls to be influential contributors in the world. And at the outset, I'd like to thank the heads of the all-girls schools from South Africa that are in the audience this morning for the wonderful work that their schools are doing in the advancement of girls in South Africa. I'd also like to thank ISASA for inviting me to represent them at this forum. My presentation offers a critical commentary on the state of and key challenges facing girls' education from the perspective of all girls independent schools in South Africa, 21 years after the transition to democracy. The focus of my presentation is on how these elite schools are responding to a complex, multidimensional, and ongoing process of transformation. South Africa is fraught with contestations and challenges, and yet remains vibrant and full of opportunities for innovation, renewal, and reimagining. Women have a critical role to play in transforming our society, which after 2 decades of transformation has the unenviable status of being one of the most unequal countries in the world. In this presentation, I raise some critical questions that we need to be addressing so that our all-girls independent schools continue to flourish and advance the contribution of women in a transforming society. The insights this presentation provides may open a window on some future possibilities which are relevant to all girls schools in other national contexts. All girls schools, like all schools, do not exist in a vacuum. Thomas Popkiewicz, an American social theorist, argues for historicity. That is, recognizing that what happens at the micro level of the school and the classroom is embedded in the overarching time, place, space framework provided by the macro context, that is, the broader education and societal system. The core business of our schools, teaching and learning, as well as the engagement with community, are shaped by and shaping the broader context in which we are located. And as this slide shows, the backdrop against which we are operating is one of political, economic, biophysical and social elements of our society. And I'm going to speak later in the presentation about what the challenges are and how we are responding. And I'm going to start with looking at independent girls' schools within the national school system, because I'm aware that not all of you might understand the South African schooling system. In 2015, there were 12.8 million children enrolled in schools in South Africa. The public sector is by far the largest. It has 12.2 million children. 95% of our children are in public schools. The public school system is a system in deep crisis. It's been referred to as a national disaster. It's characterized by poor learning outcomes and systemic inefficiencies. And in spite of numerous systemic interventions and great sums of money being spent on addressing the inequitable schooling system that characterized the apartheid era, a deep division based on class and race is still evident. On the one hand, there are functional, well-resourced schools, about 25% of schools in South Africa, that have high-quality teachers and are educating a small minority. And on the other hand, there are poor, dysfunctional schools with weak management and poor quality teachers that are not able to educate the majority of black South African children. The independent school system is a small but expanding sector as parents seek alternative forms of schooling. The 566,000 children, 4.4% of the children in South Africa who attend and are registered at independent schools. Significantly, there are only 85 all-girls schools in South Africa, 68 of which are affiliated to the Independent Schools Association of Southern Africa, whom I represent. ISASA is the oldest and largest of 8 associations to which schools in the independent sector are affiliated. There are 19,990 girls enrolled in these 68 schools, a very, very small percentage of the 12.8 million in South Africa who are at school. The average size of independent all-girls schools is 294. The smallest school, preschool, has 12 students, or 12 girls, and the largest, a secondary school, has 541. All girls independent schools are prestigious schools. They are among the older, traditional, faith-based, former whites-only schools, which we refer to as the historically privileged schools. With academic staff, excellent facilities, and effective management and leadership structures. They are often referred to as great schools. They are also elitist schools because of the high fees. That is, they charge more than $1,850 per annum for tuition, and include the most expensive schools in South Africa, the highest fee being $12,200 per annum, which is for boarding and tuition. All girls independent schools are schools of excellence and are among the top performing schools in South Africa, providing high quality education. They consistently achieve outstanding educational outcomes, achieving almost 100% pass rate in the grade 12 final examinations, with almost all their school leavers achieving bachelor level passes for university entrance. They are gateway schools providing access and a smooth transition from school to higher institutions of choice nationally and internationally. These high-functioning schools are recognized by the government as national assets that should be supported and not saddled with unnecessary burdens. All girls independent schools are characterized by diversity. The profile of girls attending these schools has changed, and today their student bodies are diverse in terms of race, language, age, culture, social class, and geographic origin. And while they are not yet representative of South African society, they nevertheless reflect the diversity in South African society. In spite of greater diversity, all girls independent schools are still predominantly white and promoting a certain Anglo-centric ethos. The exception is the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls. Independent schools, including all-girls schools, are the first choice of middle-class families due to their superior quality and standards as compared to the public schools. And in the article by a fellow dean, written at the end of last year, he observes that in the past 20 years, South Africa's middle class has grown due to a broad-based Black Economic Empower initiative and employment equity legislation. The beneficiaries of this system have bought wholeheartedly into middle-class education, sending their children to middle-class schools, with aspirations for them to either graduate from one of the top 5 universities locally or from a university abroad. Not surprisingly, the school to which these children go and the higher education institutions they aspire to attend are almost all historically white institutions, staffed by highly educated black and white middle-class professionals. All girls schools provide access through generous scholarship and bursary programs to academically talented girls from educationally and economically disadvantaged backgrounds. These schools have excellent facilities and resources, including libraries, theatres, computer labs, learning hubs, reading rooms, state-of-the-art sporting facilities, and they have the human resources in the form of skilled academic staff and good management and governance structures. They also provide a caring, supportive, and safe environment to girls in which girls can develop and grow. And most importantly, they offer a holistic educational experience, which includes the visual and performing arts, an emphasis on mathematics and science, and the social sciences and languages, and a wide choice of sports codes and cultural activities. The academic endeavour of all girls independent schools is characterised by curriculum and pedagogical innovation. This is evident in the wide repertoire of pedagogical approaches they use, the emphasis they place on 21st century skills, and the use of technology in the classroom. I've described some of the defining characteristics of all girls independent schools, and I think it's quite evident that they are in a healthy state. They are in a strong position in the national field of schooling and are playing a critical role in providing high-quality education for girls from diverse backgrounds. But these schools are also operating in a complex reality of a transforming society that has undergone enormous changes in the past 21 years. And so in terms of the contextual realities and challenges, it's important to say that when South Africa became a democracy in 1994, the government was faced with the urgent need to dismantle a deeply flawed apartheid system and reconstruct a democratic nation free of race, gender, and any other form of discrimination. At the same time, the government's transformation agenda included an economic imperative for change, motivated by the need for economic growth and job creation to eliminate poverty and reduce the gap between rich and poor, and to be competitive in a global economy. The economic and socio-political forces of neoliberal capitalism and a democratic South Africa are still impacting on South Africa today. In spite of the progress that we've made since 1994, there is evidence which suggests that we are a troubled society, with many South Africans increasingly disillusioned, frustrated and angry at the slow pace of transformation. In 2015, In 2015, we witnessed heightened levels of university student activism across the length and breadth of our country around issues of social justice, access to affordable quality higher education for all, and transformation in higher education. It has been described as a big political moment, because for the first time in modern democratic South Africa, citizen protests compelled the government to respond and act. In October 2015, a few months ago, the fees must fall student protests lit up university campuses across South Africa, causing a number of universities to close. This has never happened before. The protesting students have illustrated that while they may have been born free in a political sense, the economic and social conditions of many black African people haven't really changed. This is apparent when one considers that in spite of a growing black middle class, which at the moment is roughly half of the middle class in South Africa, roughly half the population, 27 million of a total of 54 million, mostly black South Africans continue to live below the poverty line. It's also interesting, as you'll see in the pictures that I'm showing, that the student movements were often led by strong women leaders, some of whom came from all-girls schools. So it was particularly encouraging to see how young women were actually exercising their agency and taking the lead. Last week, the Vice-Chancellor of the university where I work wrote the following in a letter to staff. He said, "The momentous events of 2015 have made us aware of how the social and economic injustices of the past continue to be a blight on our society, and it raises critical, complex and uncomfortable issues that need resolving in our society, universities and schools if we are to advance the greater good of all." South Africa is also dealing with a very depressed economy due to a slump in global commodity prices, increasing electricity tariffs and a weak currency. The value of the South African rand dropped by 30% and reached a record low of 17 rand to the US dollar at the beginning of this year. We are also experiencing the worst drought in the last 100 years, the consequence of which is retrenchment and job losses in the agricultural sector, the importing of basic foods, with food prices expected to rise by 15 to 20% this year, which of course will push up inflation. And while the impact of all of this is felt by all South Africans, it will be sorely felt by the poor. According to one political analyst, there is pressure in our society over economic decline, and that pressure is playing out on social and racial platforms. In 2015, we also experienced the highest temperatures ever recorded in South Africa since record keeping began. It alerts us to the global socio-ecological crisis we find ourselves in at present and the sustainability challenges on hand. Universities, including the one where I work, are grappling with how to reorientate education, to equip people to deal with accelerating change, increasing complexity, ambiguity, controversy, and uncertainty, both in terms of what's going on and what needs to be done. Some argue for a fundamental rethinking of learning and teaching, and a change in doing things differently rather than doing them better. So I've described some of the challenges we are facing at present. And so we need to ask, what does this mean for our elite, all-girls independent schools? There is no easy way forward. We cannot be everything to everyone. How do we judge our schools when there are so many lenses through which we can look? What are our criteria for judging a school? What role are our schools playing, and what could they be playing given the challenges we are facing at present? All-girls independent schools are seen as having a concentration of the type of capital needed to address the societal challenges we are facing in South Africa at present. This capital includes access to skilled academic staff, effective management structures, excellent facilities and resources, amongst other advantages. In many respects, Wallace writes, all girls' independent schools are exposed in certain ways, as people look to them with heightened expectations, as well as a mixture of awe and envy, to see what they are doing. These schools are seen as having a responsibility, in the light of their privileged position in South Africa, to play an active role in leading the way in advancing the transformation agenda. There is a danger if we do not take up this responsibility. Our legitimacy and relevance in South Africa will be called into question. It's significant that in 2015, the university student protests and campaigns about transformation have been directed mostly at South Africa's top historically white universities, with their structures, processes, and institutional cultures being called into question for maintaining and perpetuating inequality. We need also to be mindful that there's no such thing as a neutral education process. Education and schools either function as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. I think that's very, very pertinent given where we are at this moment in our history. And so how are we responding, and how should we be responding so that our legacy of quality education continues into the future, with girls from our schools leading the way in building a more equitable, socially just and prosperous South Africa? There are three critical questions that I believe we need to be asking. The first is, how can we advance the transformation agenda? Secondly, how do we ensure that our curriculum and pedagogy are relevant, responsive, and innovative? And thirdly, how do we respond to the challenge of affordability and financial sustainability? So if we look at the first one, all girls' schools have made progress towards achieving racial diversity and equity in their student body, as the emergent black middle class has grown from 350,000 black middle class South Africans in 1994 to 4.1 million today. It's just tipped more than 50% of the middle class, but that growth has been too slow. Assuming economic growth continues, and given that the majority of South Africans are black, it's likely that racial equity will be achieved in the foreseeable future. The progress has not been as positive when it comes to racial equity amongst the academic staff, with black female teachers being underrepresented. It's really, really important that we address this so that all girls have role models that they can look up to. We also need to look closely at the gender and racial composition of our management and governance structures. Good progress is being made with social class diversification in the student body, largely because of the bold steps taken by all girls independent schools to strengthen and expand their bursary and scholarship programs, thus increasing access for academically talented girls from educationally and economically disadvantaged backgrounds. These changes have meant that our girls' schools are no longer dealing with a homogeneous student body like they did in the past. Today, 26% of the girls enrolled in all girls independent schools are black, from both middle class and working class homes. Importantly, an increase in middle class black girls' enrollments has meant that socio-economic advantage has replaced racial, i.e. white advantage, with the majority of girls coming from affluent black and white middle class families. Increasing racial and social diversity brings complexities and challenges. According to Hofmeyr and Lee, until a critical mass of 35% black learners is reached, the dominant culture is likely to remain white, middle class, and assimilationist. Class diversity within our black population adds another layer of complexity to our schools. And this brings into question the kind of girls our schools are trying to produce, the values and traditions we hold dear, the behaviors we reward, and what role models we provide for our girls. It also raises uncomfortable questions about privilege and institutional culture, and the extent to which our schools are welcoming and inclusive, as opposed to alienating and uncomfortable spaces for all our girls. Are we engaging deeply enough with the difficult questions about diversity and institutional culture? The transition from a poor working-class family to a prestigious school where a middle-class Anglo-centric ethos predominates is not an easy or smooth transition for everyone. How do we reduce the alienation and discomfort some girls may experience when they enter our schools? Arthur Kimmel's ideas about privilege in the United States of America are useful for thinking about privilege in a South African all-girls independent school context. He explains that to run or walk into a strong headwind is to understand the power of nature. You set your jaws in a square grimace, your eyes are slits against the wind, and you breathe with fierce determination, and still you make no progress. To walk or run with that same wind at your back is to float, to sail effortlessly, expending virtually no energy. You do not feel the wind, it feels you. You do not feel how it pushes you along, you only feel the effortlessness of your movements. You feel like you could go on forever. Only when you turn and face the wind do you realize its strength. Kimmel then uses the image of the wind to talk about how being white or male or heterosexual in the United States is like running with the wind at your back. Institutional culture is like the wind. If it's at your back, in other words, you fit in with your institution's culture, you probably don't notice it, and you don't realize how it helps you move effortlessly forward. But if you are running into the wind, in other words, you don't fit in with the prevailing institutional culture, you can feel as though even moving forward slightly requires incredible effort and determination. And this raises sensitive and difficult questions that all of us are grappling with in South Africa. How should we be engaging with privilege in our schools? To what extent are our girls oblivious of their social and economic advantage? To what extent are we educating girls for a life of privilege, or conscientizing them to their privilege and encouraging them to use their privilege for the greater good? Another American, Peggy McIntosh, writing about white privilege in the United States, tries to show white people how they are privileged in ways that are not probably visible to them most of the time. She says that white privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, visas, tools, blank checks, and so on. She then unpacks the so-called invisible knapsack and draws up a list to help white people recognize what's in their knapsack of privilege. We've done a similar thing at the university where I work. And I wondered to what extent we are helping our girls unpack the invisible knapsack of white, social class, and economic privilege that they may carry without being conscious of its contents. An interesting exercise for us would be to ask what would be on our list if we had to unpack the knapsack in our all-girls independent schools. And I sat thinking, and I came up with a few. My friends are not surprised to hear about the latest skiing holiday my family went on. I feel comfortable signing the list being circulated by my peers, asking me to state how much I'd like to give as a tip, which I can charge to my parents' account for our cleanup. I'm accustomed to using the different cutlery laid out in the school dining room, If I mislay my school blazer, I can simply order another one. When I'm invited to a friend's home for dinner, I'm familiar with the general etiquette that goes with these sorts of events. I have the latest gadgets, including an iPhone and a tablet. How are we educating our girls to be aware of and acknowledge their advantage, be it social, race, or economic, and to use it in ways that benefit others? How do we do it in ways that don't engender feelings of guilt? Making visible our privileges is a responsive way in which we can embrace and grapple with diversity. It will help us to begin to understand why some people feel comfortable and at home, and others may not at our schools. This awareness opens opportunities for change and for using our positions of privilege to try and advance the interests of those who are not in the same position of privilege. And ultimately, it will help to create a more inclusive school and society. To what extent are we asking questions about the dominant cultural forms at our schools? Do our visual representations, practices and traditions, and naming strategies reflect our diversity? And how are we dealing with ambiguity about feminism? How does the hidden curriculum promote traditional socio-cultural values and roles of women as homemakers, good hostess, and supportive partner? From my interactions with female university students and my observations in some social circles, I'm aware that these expectations are still pervasive and powerful. What more should we be doing to interrogate the assumptions we make without realizing their implications and consequences? And this brings me then to the second question. How do we ensure that our curriculum and pedagogy are relevant and responsive to the challenges we face? I'm aware of many exciting curriculum innovations and pedagogical experiments taking place in all-girls independent schools. And these demonstrate that we are on the cutting edge. But given the technology and digital revolution we are experiencing at present, how are we educating girls to act responsibly in the digital age? The use of technology in our schools has meant higher levels of connectivity and an increasing dependency on networks that also make us vulnerable. How and for what purpose are we using technology like iPads and tablets? How are we educating girls about the power shifts enabled by the World Wide Web and the danger and consequences of a shutdown? It's widely acknowledged that we're on the brink of the fourth industrial revolution. And with the anticipated advantage of robots and artificial intelligence, we need to be asking, how are we preparing our girls to navigate this uncharted territory? How do we ensure that our curriculum and pedagogy are responsive? Given the socio-ecological challenges, especially climate change, facing us, how are we educating girls to deal with accelerating change, increasing complexity, ambiguity, controversy, and uncertainty, both in terms of what is going on and what needs to be done? How are we educating girls to advance the role played by women in the global knowledge society? In August 2015, the South African government released the first report on the status of women in the South African economy. President Zuma writes that this report provides a baseline for the work to promote the socio-economic empowerment of women and gender equality and to advance their human rights. And he notes that in spite of a plethora of progressive legislation, women have not advanced as rapidly in terms of socio-economic empowerment and gender equality as we would have wished. The government also acknowledges that when more women are involved in economic activities, the economy grows faster. And the National Development Plan identifies the financial inclusion of women as a critical tool that will result in quicker poverty elimination, the achievement of gender equality, and a stable democracy. Now, while great strides have been made by women across the different levels of education, educational advancement at the higher levels, the master's and doctoral levels, wanes, particularly in the STEM sector, with women representing a small minority of graduates, 28% in engineering, manufacturing and construction, and less than 50% of graduates in agriculture and science. How successful are all-girls independent schools in producing engineers and scientists, and economists and accountants? If South Africa is to build a knowledge-based economy that positions it between developed and developing countries, it will need to increase its PhD production by a factor of about 5 in the next 10 to 20 years. This means that we have to double the doctoral graduates. Currently, we only produce 2,000 doctoral graduates. We're going to need to double that. And we also need to address gender and race disparities that exist in higher education. It's interesting to note that in 2012, 44% of academic staff in universities were women. But what's worrying and troubling is that the level of disparity increases as one moves up the ranks from lecturer to professor. All girls independent schools are in a strong position to respond to these challenges. But are we tracking how successfully we are in responding? Are we celebrating our achievements? And this then brings me to the last question. How do we respond to the challenge of affordability and financial sustainability? Given the depressed state of our economy, we cannot continue to increase our school fees, lest we risk pricing ourselves out of the market. How then do we do things differently without compromising our educational standards? With the advancement of women and their taking up well-paid positions in a variety of professional fields, we're starting to see a change in the way women think about stewardship, but we still have a way to go. So then how do we change mindsets and engender a culture of women giving back to their alma maters? How do we develop and expand women's networks? There's still a notable disparity between the networks created by all-boys schools and all-girls schools, with the latter placing greater emphasis on social as opposed to professional networks. This unfortunately reinforces gender stereotyping and results in girls having to rely on their brothers' and fathers' old-boys networks for their professional support, including, for example, internships, graduate placements, inductions and mentoring. And that's why it's so important that we are able to participate and be here with you this week, because we need to build our women's networks, and one way of doing it is through the National Coalition of Schools. But we also need to build the professional networks both within and between our schools in South Africa. I've opened a window on the state of all-girls independent schools in the context of a transforming South Africa. And I've raised 3 critical questions about the roles our schools are playing and can play. Firstly, in advancing the transformation agenda by providing access and support to academically talented girls from diverse racial, social, cultural, linguistic, economic, and geographical backgrounds. By embracing diversity and creating and sustaining and affirming inclusive and positive institutional culture, and addressing issues of racial and gender equity at all levels of the school. Secondly, I've spoken about how we can maintain and enhance the high-quality education that we offer so that it is responsive and relevant and develops girls' capabilities for participation in building a more equitable, socially just and globally competitive South Africa. And thirdly, I've asked questions about how do we ensure that all girls independent schools are affordable and financially sustainable. The extent to which our schools continue to flourish in the future will depend on a few things. Firstly, how willing we are to hold up our practices and traditions and to scrutiny and critical interrogation. How willing we are to have hard, honest conversations. How comfortable we are with ambiguity and uncertainty and the messiness of change. And how well we maximize the opportunities for innovation, renewal, reimagining, and enhancement that challenges provide. I believe we must face the future with confidence and hope, and we must endeavour to lead the way in creating a world of possibilities for young South African women from diverse backgrounds. I believe the greatest asset that we have for girls at the moment is the high-quality education that our independent girls' schools and some of our public all-girls schools are providing. And so, as much as we have many challenges, we also need to affirm the good work that we are doing and look with confidence to the future. Thank you very, very much for inviting me to be with you.
Insightful comments, and it wouldn't surprise you to know that all those questions, I'm sure, relate to all of us, especially the one near and dear to my heart is financial sustainability. We have a couple minutes for questions if anyone would like to engage, or if not, I'm sure Dr. Wilmot will be happy to stay and answer any questions.
I'm wondering about whether there's any research or looked at partnerships between schools, particularly in America and in South Africa, girls' schools, to get at some of the issues of privilege and of race and diversity and inclusion. Sometimes understanding your culture may help you understand your own a little bit better because you share that discussion. Have you seen great partnerships that have hit on this particular topic?
I have to ask the heads of the schools that are here, but certainly it is something that they have been pursuing. There are a lot of exchange programs with schools around the world, not only in the States, but in other countries as well, India and elsewhere. But I do believe that we need to share. I think as much as we're grappling with these issues, perhaps the area that needs further development is the explicit teaching about diversity. What are we actually doing in our classrooms? And how do we actually foreground that? And teach it in a way that it's not something done after hours and in a society and so on. But yes, I think that exchange between different schools is something that we really need to pursue.
As you've looked to break down kind of that diversity within your school community between the populations that are now present in your classes, have you seen anything particularly effective with the parents? Because so often a lot of our perceptions of division occur from deep-seated things in the home.
That's a very good point. I think the parents are more of the challenge than, it's called generation gap.
Yes.
I'm a parent. I think it's about how do we realize that all of us, transformation is not about other people. It's about how do we actually look at ourselves and hold a mirror up to ourselves. And we heard yesterday the need for critical reflection, of acknowledging and owning the assumptions, the values, the values that we're promoting, and that we sometimes don't even realize that we're transferring into our daughters. I think it's critical. I think our daughters have an enormous role to play in challenging us. But I do know that if talking to heads of schools, that the greatest challenge they face is they might be doing amazing, exciting, difficult work with their student body, but it's how do you bring the parents on board? You also have conservatism amongst your teaching staff, and it would be a lie not to acknowledge that. And so how do you take people along? And I think it's about making people realize that change is not something to fear. It's something that's difficult, but actually, if you live with hope, you can actually confront the difficulties. And I think it's about creating a safe space and making parents feel safe, respected, heard, but also challenging. challenging worldviews.
Well, I will let you go to the next session. Thank you, Professor Wilmot. This is something we